Hey everyone, I wanted to do a quick follow-up on the interview I had with the Bernie Sanders field organizer because the majority of people really gave a great response as to how this makes sense now and how they could relate. But there was also a few people that felt like this was divisive, and I want to address that. I don't at all believe that people who worked for a campaign and put all their hard work and sweat should be regarded as being divisive, and them expressing that their experience should be regarded as being divisive. I think it's unfair to categorize these people and their hard work when they were the core part of this movement, and they did so much for Bernie Sanders and for the movement. And it's important to hear what they experienced and what their concerns were. So I just think thinking like that is absolutely, it's uncalled for. But obviously people are going to have their opinions, and there's more to come. There are a lot of people that want to pretty much just vent and, go over what their experience was and how they felt it could have been better. And it's necessary, especially because we as a movement are relatively new to the electoral politics. Before, there really weren't any campaigns that were like Sanders, and that's something that he and everybody should be proud of, that he attempted to really run a grassroots campaign in a destructive, corrupt system. And it was going to never be easy to do because the system itself is corrupt. And we should have known that him running as a Democrat would have been difficult. I think the first time he ran, he caught the establishment off guard, and he was able to surprise them in many ways. And this time, they really prepared themselves and organized themselves to really go against him, and used their power over the elections to really subvert his campaign and to really squash it. And they used manipulations, they used everything they could, and that wasn't easy to do anyway. I also think that a third party would have faced the same obstacles, because ultimately it's the system that's the problem. You could run the most perfect candidate under an independent, and it would still be very difficult to overwhelm the system when the system favors the corrupt, because it's run by the corrupt. So I am with you to the people who say, well, we need a third party. We have multiple parties. They just don't have the power. They don't have the power because the system is set up to keep them powerless. So until we address that, we're not going to change anything. And I think we need to learn that we need to go outside of the electorate, especially right now that the time is ripe to achieve that. And then, of course, the electorate will change. But to try to do this again in 2024 when election issues haven't been addressed is, in my opinion, a giant waste of time. People who say that this is divisive need to understand that we are divided, and we're divided because the system has made it so, has made progressive movements impossible to have, has made us have to choose between being part of the electorate and then being part of a movement. And unfortunately, this Bernie Sanders campaign was operating under a corrupt system. So even if they had chosen better people, we still wouldn't have had election integrity. We still would have had to deal with a lot of the corruption. So that isn't even only the full answer. You can't run a grassroots campaign with the establishment on top. You can't do it, because then it's not a grassroots campaign. It's an establishment-led campaign with the grassroots doing all the work and being abused and misused, and having the wrong players in there really hurt Bernie's chances a lot. He didn't have that same momentum, and that was evident in many cases. Now, I do think, like I said, the election issue, had that been addressed, I think that would have drastically helped the Sanders campaign, because we all know this election was a sham. We all know it was run completely unfairly. I also think that we need to stop being sycophants, and that is my main point. you can love Bernie, you can love what he stood for, you can love the hard work he did, you can appreciate him, but to disagree with him is absolutely not only acceptable, it is absolutely vital to our growth and our movement. If we don't disagree with politicians that we admire, then we're sycophants. We're fans to them. We then worship them. We are not here then to work alongside them, but to revere them. And that's not going to result in anything good. That is how you build totalitarian governments, how you build dictators. Thankfully, for us, Bernie Sanders doesn't have that sort of attitude. But precisely his lacking of that attitude is what also didn't help him, because if you're looking at what Trump's ads, for instance, have been doing, you can see that if Bernie Sanders had done that to Biden, it would have been far more effective than punching lightly and treading lightly against him. It would have been something that people are craving. People needed to have that sort of gloves off attitude from Bernie Sanders. They just absolutely needed it, and he didn't give it. And he didn't give it because he didn't want to be like Trump. But ironically, in those ways, it would have been good to be like Trump. I wish the Sanders campaign would have put ads like that, but better, policy focused and more fact based than what Trump did. It didn't have to be as petty or as lowly, but it would have been far better than a lot of the things that were done. And I know he was advised against that, but I think that was a mistake. And it's okay to go over and have closure. We're ending a sort of relationship, and a lot of people need closure. A lot of people still have a lot of questions as to what happened, because Bernie Sanders' campaign had everything to succeed. It had the largest number of volunteers. It had so much momentum, and in spite of the problems, it had the most amount of money and the largest rallies. I mean, it was just all there to succeed. And it seemed to have the grassroots movement, but that's what it was. It was just superficially the grassroots was there, but the grassroots wasn't in charge, and you can tell. And a lot of people were kept out of the inner circle that shouldn't have been kept out, and you can tell. And it's important to discuss that. It is not smearing Bernie, and I know you guys are going to see a lot of people out there say that those of us exposing this and talking about this are grifters. Grifters are, first of all, they shouldn't be used when it comes to actual independent investigative journalism, because just because they're not the New York Times, which you shouldn't revere either, is just ridiculous. People say they want to get rid of mainstream media, then they go and continuously support mainstream media. So as much as you support mainstream media, you should be supporting independent media. You should be supporting the people bringing these stories, because I don't know of anybody else that's going to give a voice to a field organizer in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I really know very few people that be willing to do that. I also know very few journalists out there who'd be willing to talk about election rigging or election fraud or election integrity. And I think it's important that we remember that and support our independent media and independent journalists, because otherwise we're just hypocrites and guilty of not really walking the walk, so to speak. There's always going to be people that really think that this is all just to start something and divide and whatever, but usually those are the people that are doing just that. They're usually the ones projecting. We're going to be hearing more regarding not only the Bernie Sanders campaign and what happened locally here in LA and California, but we're also going to be hearing from people in other states and nationally. There's a lot of accountability to be had. There's a lot of apologies and a lot of healing that is needed, and it's okay and it's necessary. People really want that, and people are going to come out and tell their stories, and I think that should be welcomed rather than buried, because if we don't learn from our mistakes, this is going to happen again. And it's important to out the people who are not really a part of this movement and have only wished to benefit from it monetarily and superficially through popularity, through any means. And I think it's important that we identify who those people are so this doesn't continue happening. Most movements die or decimate as a result of infiltration, as a result of co-option, and this movement has entirely been co-opted. It's very hard to use the word progressive anymore because everybody calls himself that, and what we're seeing is that we are slowly needing to choose between being part of the Democratic Party that is always going to alienate us and always going to push us out and always going to push duality type of vitriol type of mentality where it's you either agree with us or you're just out, and they're going to push party loyalty over loyalty to the people, or we're going to finally understand that you're never going to get their approval, and that goes to Bernie as well. You're never going to get their approval no matter how kind you are and how nice you are, and you need to go around them, beyond them, and really seek power in numbers, because what's happening now is that the working class and middle class are both being screwed by the establishment, and people are realizing that, and so we need to tap into that and use it to our advantage. So while it's very easy to fall into this idea of being a fan of Bernie, and I am in a way a huge admirer of Bernie even now. I think, I thank him for what he did and what he continues to do, but at the same time I think it's important we stand strong against voting for Joe Biden and against voting for Donald Trump, and stand strong in voting for a third party, and even further than that, which is the most important thing, stand strong in building up this mass movement of people outside of the electoral field that can later on take it over. And that is the thing that I think is the quickest way for this to happen. It is proven to be based on history, and it's precisely what we need to do next. Again, a lot of people looked to Bernie as a leader, and I think he was a leader that didn't want to be one, which is, most of the people that should be in charge don't really want it. What we should do is look to each other as being leaders, look to people becoming a giant collective of several leaders, not just one person. When you do that, you create this idea that one person's going to solve everything, and that's simply irresponsible. It's also delusional because it's not how it works. Then you lose everything when that person doesn't do what you want them to do or doesn't go as far as you want them to do. This is why movements that are centralized in message but decentralized in structure work best, and that's pretty much what I'm going to be advocating from here on out. Understand that it's not only I'm obviously reporting what her story is, but also what other people have given me and what other people's experiences are, and it's all very true. And I experienced it myself. I saw it myself. So it's also firsthand accounts of what I saw here. And obviously we still won California, but that was in spite of the mismanagement of his campaign. Not because of, it was in spite of it, due to the grassroots and the volunteers that were working in the campaign. And the election issues that happened, we will obviously continue to talk about those, but I just want to say enough with creating celebrities out of leaders, enough with trying to push somebody in 2024 when we haven't fixed the structures that led to Donald Trump, the structures that led to the selection of Joe Biden as a Democratic nominee, even while he is probably the worst candidate we've ever had in history. Not understanding that is really going to put us in a position where we just remain stagnant, and we really can't afford to. So watch the video, continue to support independent journalism. It's okay to criticize people you admire. It's okay to criticize Bernie Sanders. It's okay to disagree with Bernie Sanders, and we must stand against Joe Biden's election. You're going to see everybody, as I've said before, capitulate right now, and it's going to be very hard to not start thinking, well, maybe just this once. But remember, they always do it. They always say, well, just this once, you have to vote for the lesser of evils. And the thing is that at this point, just like it was in 2016, the Democratic candidate is actually not the lesser of evils. And more people see it this time. There was an Intercept article that came out, and it was talking about how the author thought, I think it was Jeremy Scale, thought that most burners are going to be voting for Joe Biden, and I 100% disagree with that. I think that is so far from the truth. I think people are underestimating the disdain and the anger and resentment and the way people are so fed up. Stand strong and advocate for solutions, not just the idea that one figurehead is going to solve all the problems when that figurehead is part of the same system as the other one, and it's part of the same system that put us here in the first place.